When the first screenshots appeared, they didn't come with context, only chaos. A handful of grainy images, posted on a quiet night, ignited a fire that no one could extinguish. They were said to be Meghan's private messages, texts she sent to palace staff during the height of her struggle behind royal walls. For years, whispers of these messages had lingered in corners of the press, dismissed as rumor or fabrication. But now, they were real, raw, unfiltered, and their sudden exposure threatened to dismantle what little trust remained between Meghan and the monarchy. At first, the palace refused to respond. The corridors of Kensington fell into an uneasy silence. Staff who once smiled for cameras now avoided eye contact, terrified of saying the wrong thing. The Queen's press office went into lockdown. Phones were confiscated, meetings postponed, and every whisper monitored. This wasn't just a PR disaster, it was a breach of royal containment. Someone, somewhere, had crossed the line. And the monarchy didn't know how deep the cut went. The texts themselves told a story no one had prepared for. At times, Meghan's tone was tender, pleading for understanding, begging for empathy in a world that refused to bend. But other messages burned with frustration that felt almost personal. "I can't keep being treated like this," one allegedly read. Another, colder still, "You'll regret crossing me." These words weren't the diplomatic polish the palace was used to. They were raw emotion wrapped in power. What began as empathy soon looked like warfare through words. As the images spread, social media erupted. Online forums dissected every phrase, every timestamp, every punctuation mark. Was she defending herself, or was she manipulating? The lines blurred quickly. Commentators turned detectives, while journalists whispered of a shadow war brewing beneath the surface. The palace had always been built on discretion, but in the digital age, discretion was a myth. The monarchy's walls were crumbling, not from scandal, but from screenshots. Inside, aides scrambled to verify what was real. Some messages were familiar reminders from hectic schedules and chaotic days. Others were unrecognizable, their wording sharper, their phrasing colder. Who had access? Who saved them? And most importantly, who had reason to release them? Every potential suspect came under quiet scrutiny, from senior assistants to former press officers. The royal household was now a stage for suspicion. Even loyalty began to look dangerous. But beneath the confusion was something more deliberate. The timing of the leak was too perfect, too precise. It arrived days before an official royal engagement, overshadowing what should have been a moment of unity. The insider behind the leak didn't just want exposure, they wanted control. It was as if the messages had been held back, saved for the moment. They would inflict the greatest damage. The public consumed every word like scripture, hungry for the next revelation. Analysts debated whether the messages revealed emotional collapse or masterful strategy. Yet one truth began to emerge from the noise. These texts weren't simply emotional outbursts. They were part of a larger pattern, a calculated rhythm that hinted at something much deeper. The leak was no coincidence. It was an opening move. As the frenzy reached fever pitch, the palace's silence became deafening. Their hesitation looked like guilt, their control like concealment. The monarchy had faced scandal before, but this felt different. This was intimate, personal, the kind of exposure that left scars rather than headlines. And as the public devoured every leaked word, a darker realization took hold. The messages weren't just emotional, they were strategic. Each one part of a greater design, a silent chess match unfolding behind royal walls. And the timing of their leak was no accident. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Every message carried intent, every word was crafted with precision. These were not impulsive outbursts fired off in moments of rage. They were instruments of influence. Each text carried its own rhythm, a balance between charm and control, apology and accusation. To the untrained eye, they seemed emotional. To those who studied them, they were tactical. Experts began to dissect the messages line by line, and what they found went far beyond the ordinary. The tone wasn't random. It followed patterns used in political crisis management and celebrity reputation repair. Certain phrases mirrored the language of professional publicists, coded words designed to bend perception while appearing sincere. It wasn't simply conversation. It was narrative construction in real time. Analysts noticed how Meghan alternated between endearments and ultimatums, weaving emotional warmth with quiet threats. One message began with affection, soft, almost pleading only to end with an icy warning that left no room for dissent. This dance of empathy and authority created a psychological tug-of-war, drawing recipients closer before pushing them to the edge. It was power disguised as vulnerability, manipulation wrapped in charm. Those on the receiving end described it as impossible to navigate. To resist was to seem cruel, but to comply was to surrender. It was a test few passed unscathed. Palace staff began to recognize the pattern too late. Many had initially read her tone as the product of pressure, even pain. But as the texts accumulated, the contradictions grew impossible to ignore. She could make you feel like her ally in one breath, a former aide confided, and her enemy in the next. Emotional exhaustion set in as staff found themselves caught between duty to the crown and empathy for the Duchess. Every reply felt like a gamble, every silence like defiance. Some described sleepless nights, revisiting every exchanged word, wondering if their response might someday appear on a front page. And then came the recurring phrase, the plan. It appeared subtly at first, nestled between words of frustration and hope. Once the plan is in motion, one text said, everything will change. No one outside the inner circle knew what that plan was, but its repetition gave it weight, suggesting a larger strategy unfolding behind the palace gates. The phrase became a whisper in corridors, a question no one dared voice aloud. Was this about reputation? Or something deeper, a reordering of royal power itself? What made the messages chilling wasn't only their content, but their intent. Each seemed to anticipate reaction, counter it, and reframe it before anyone could respond. Meghan's tone held both the softness of a plea and the steel of command, as though she understood precisely which note to strike to keep others off balance. This wasn't mere communication. It was orchestration. Those who read the texts could almost feel the pulse of control beneath the words, like a heartbeat hidden behind grace. The more the experts analyzed, the clearer the pattern became. The messages didn't just seek understanding, they sought dominance. They were built on an architecture of emotion, using apology as armor and affection as bait. It was the kind of psychological warfare only the powerful or the desperate could master. And as the analysis deepened, one haunting conclusion began to form. The messages were never truly about the recipients at all. They were about shaping the palace itself. But if the texts revealed strategy, they also revealed something darker: fear. Fear not of exposure, but of something greater than bad headlines. A fear rooted deep within the gilded walls of the monarchy, where silence was currency and secrets were survival, and that fear was about to come to light. They were never meant to speak. The silent recipients' names buried under layers of confidentiality, loyalty, and fear became the unseen audience of one of the most turbulent private wars in royal history. They were the invisible threads holding the palace machinery together, the aides who operated behind the grandeur, unseen yet indispensable. For years, they worked under oaths of silence, upholding decorum even as chaos brewed around them. But now, the very messages they once received in confidence had turned into evidence, and their silence, once a sign of duty, had become a weapon against them. Among them were figures once trusted beyond question, aides who answered late-night calls, scheduled secret meetings, and managed emotional storms behind closed doors. Their devotion was never in doubt, but loyalty in the royal household is a dangerous currency. As the leaked text surfaced, fragments of private exchanges exposed their inner turmoil. One aide, who had served multiple royals, found herself accused of betrayal after expressing exhaustion from the emotional tension that seemed to shadow every interaction. Another, younger staffer, reportedly resigned abruptly after months of erratic communication that left her feeling both guilty and used. None of them spoke publicly, but the whispers within the palace walls painted a grim picture: exhaustion disguised as professionalism, loyalty twisted into leverage. There were stories of tears behind closed doors, of nights spent rereading old messages, unsure how to respond to the tone that swung from affection to accusation. A single word from Meghan could feel like grace or a warning. The contrast left them uncertain whether they were allies or pawns. It wasn't the content alone that broke them. It was the power imbalance embedded in every interaction. To serve royalty was to exist in the shadow of hierarchy. And yet Meghan's approach blurred those lines, turning subordinates into confidants, then into suspects. The emotional weight crushed some quietly, leaving behind resignation letters crafted with diplomacy but written in heartbreak. One senior aide, described as meticulous and discreet, began to keep records not out of malice but survival. A digital archive of texts, call logs, and notes for protection, as they reportedly put it. They knew the storm was coming. Every communication felt like a ticking clock, every instruction laced with consequence. It wasn't paranoia, it was self-preservation. For within the royal system, truth rarely shields those who speak it. It only exposes them. And yet, buried within the texts themselves were glimpses of something unexpected. Meghan's tone, though demanding, often bled with vulnerability. Between the sharp edges of her words lay confessions of fear of being isolated, of being shut out, of becoming the next royal ghost swallowed by the institution. They're closing in. One alleged message read, "I can feel it." Another voice note, quietly leaked later, carried a trembling tone, "I know what they're planning." Those words lingered like an echo, impossible to dismiss, suggesting a woman trapped between rebellion and ruin. Inside the palace, these revelations shook more than reputations. They fractured trust. HR officials, normally discreet and detached, began to review private correspondence. A quiet internal investigation unfolded behind the marble facades, not to assign blame, but to contain fallout. The monarchy, long practiced in managing scandal, understood that silence could no longer shield them. They were no longer protecting one of their own. They were protecting the institution from itself. But as the aides retreated into silence, terrified of being drawn deeper into the storm, the story took a darker turn. The media's next discovery would prove even more volatile. Meghan hadn't just been texting staff. She had been texting inside the palace system itself, reaching into corridors that even royalty rarely dared to touch. What began as a scandal of words soon transformed into something far darker, a digital labyrinth of secrets woven through the palace's own communication veins. Beneath the public outrage and emotional chaos, investigators uncovered what they called the shadow thread, a hidden network of messages routed through unofficial channels. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was infrastructure encrypted, strategic, and unnervingly organized. Every revelation pulled another thread loose, revealing that the leak had not come from chaos, but from control. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Tech experts working with the palace began mapping digital pathways, tracing timestamps, IP trails, and message patterns that defied protocol. To their astonishment, several of the leaked texts had traveled through an internal royal server, one reserved for classified communication between senior aides. Meghan's number appeared connected to it multiple times, though no official correspondence should have ever been routed that way. The findings sent shockwaves through the team. If her messages had truly entered those restricted systems, it meant access was granted, not stolen. Someone inside the palace had opened a door. As they dug deeper, the anomalies multiplied. Data packets linked to the leak bounced through anonymous relays, hidden intermediaries that erased their origins. Whoever orchestrated this had knowledge far beyond that of a standard user. It was deliberate, surgical. One investigator described it as an inside operation disguised as chaos. Certain texts even contained markers of re-encryption, as though they had been scrubbed and resent to conceal their digital fingerprints. The result was a ghostly trail, traces of communication that shouldn't exist, yet couldn't be denied. Then came the phrase that changed everything: the directive. It appeared only a handful of times in the messages, always with urgency. "Wait for the directive," one text read. "Do not act until it's signed." Insiders whispered that the term referred to private orders issued by senior royals, instructions never written down, only spoken, and meant to vanish into rumor. Its reappearance in Meghan's alleged texts suggested she wasn't simply reacting to the palace machine. She was moving within it. Whether she was following those orders or fighting them, no one could say for sure. But its existence exposed a layer of governance the public was never meant to see. The deeper the investigation went, the more fear seeped into the palace halls. Aides began quietly deleting old messages, even those unrelated to the scandal, fearing their words might be next. Some were warned by superiors to clean digital traces for their own safety. One aide reportedly broke down, claiming they'd been told to erase files that might never have existed. The atmosphere turned icy. No one trusted anyone. Every phone felt like a weapon. Amid this paranoia, another discovery emerged, a text referencing the council. No context, no names, just two words that detonated speculation across internal circles. Was this the same mysterious council rumored to advise the monarch behind closed doors? Or was it something newer, something created in secret during the crisis? Palace staff refused to comment, and those who once spoke freely suddenly fell silent. The words, "the council," disappeared from every internal mention, as though the term itself had become forbidden. By now, the investigators had drawn a chilling conclusion: this leak wasn't random. It wasn't a disgruntled ex-employee or an external hack. The evidence pointed inward. The encryption signatures, the access to royal servers, the timing of the uploads, all of it bore the mark of someone with clearance. Someone who had walked the palace corridors, who knew the systems, who understood how to hide behind protocol. And when they finally traced the signal to its origin, the truth hit like a lightning strike. The line didn't lead to an outsider, nor to a journalist, nor to any public figure. It led directly into the palace's own heart, to someone no one dared suspect. Every secret within the royal walls has its guardian. For years, the palace operated under an unspoken law: silence protects survival. But silence has its limits, and when one loyal servant decided they had seen enough, that law was shattered. The insider who leaked Meghan's messages wasn't driven by gossip or greed. They were driven by fatigue, the exhaustion of serving two masters at once, of covering for both sides while watching the truth suffocate beneath layers of manipulation. This was not a moment of impulse. It was revenge long in the making. For years, this aide had stood at the heart of royal operations, the unseen mediator between warring temperaments and clashing agendas. They knew how the palace spun chaos into order, how emotion was buried under protocol, and how every scandal was rewritten before it reached the light. But the messages, they said, were different. They weren't just private thoughts, they were evidence. Proof of manipulation, gaslighting, and strategic deceit, not from one party, but from all directions. The aide reportedly described it as a machine built on hypocrisy, where truth was currency and compassion was expendable. They had been complicit for too long, and when they finally broke, they did so with precision, not panic. The timing of the leak wasn't coincidental. Just days before a major palace announcement meant to restore stability, the screenshots began circulating. The revelation hijacked the news cycle, dismantling months of carefully orchestrated messaging. It was a strike designed not to expose Meghan alone, but to unravel the facade of control the monarchy had clung to for years. In one devastating move, the insider turned the crown's strength, its secrecy, into its greatest vulnerability. Those who once called the leaks treason soon realized they had been timed to perfection, almost as if to stop something larger from being declared. What was that announcement meant to be? No one inside the palace has ever said, but whispers suggest it would have shifted the public narrative, possibly even rewritten history. Hidden deep within the data sent to journalists were not just texts, but supplemental documents, notes, internal memos, and correspondence between departments. One folder, later traced to the aide's encrypted drive, carried files labeled Crisis Coordination. The documents detailed months of internal strategy meetings, some allegedly involving senior officials who coordinated statements behind the scenes. Buried among them was a single-page, unsigned, unheaded, but unmistakably royal in tone. It outlined financial settlements and non-disclosure agreements related to communication breaches. It was, as one investigator later described, a receipt of silence. When confronted, insiders revealed something even more startling. The whistleblower had been offered hush money, an unofficial payment intended to ensure their continued discretion. But when the funds stopped and access was revoked, loyalty turned into liberation. The aide no longer wanted protection. They wanted exposure. With their final act, they attached a note to the leak, written in plain, unflinching words. The truth deserves daylight. Those 5 words detonated across the institution like a bomb. Because daylight, for the monarchy, has always been the greatest threat. It blinds, it burns, and it leaves no place for shadows. The revelation fractured alliances, froze communication channels, and pushed once trusted figures into isolation. Panic spread faster than policy, and in the confusion, one question echoed through the marble halls. If the aide knew this much, what else did they hold back? But daylight brings danger, because as soon as the texts went public, another movement began, quiet, coordinated, and ruthless. A darker campaign designed not to uncover the truth, but to bury it before it ever reached the throne. The palace never forgives, and it reorganizes. Within hours of the leak, the crown's quiet composure turned into cold calculation. Inside the gilded offices, strategy replaced shock. Every department received its unspoken order: contain the story, reassert control, and protect the institution at all costs. What followed wasn't chaos, it was choreography. The monarchy had been wounded, but it would not bleed in public. By dawn, royal public relations units had synchronized their response. Every statement was crafted to minimize, not deny. The messages have been taken out of context. Personal correspondence is being misrepresented. The wording was deliberate, measured, almost dismissive enough to redirect sympathy without confirming a single fact. Then came the whispers to the press. Anonymous sources close to the palace emerged, painting Meghan's allies as reckless opportunists chasing attention. In a matter of hours, the conversation shifted. It was no longer about what the text said, but about the supposed instability of the woman behind them. It wasn't just defense, it was erasure through narrative control. Behind that polished facade, something more ruthless was unfolding. Private investigators were quietly commissioned to trace the origin of the leak. Digital footprints were mapped, phone logs cross-referenced, and online activity monitored with surgical precision. What they uncovered alarmed the palace. The breach had not been external. It had come from within the monarchy's own system. But the official stance never admitted that. Instead, lawyers began drafting confidential notices, preparing to invoke secrecy protocols reserved for matters threatening the crown's internal security. It was a rare measure, one used only when the sanctity of royal correspondence itself was at stake. Inside those walls, fear tightened its grip. Staff members were summoned to private briefings and told in chilling clarity, "This is not a story, it's a crime." The phrase echoed through corridors like a warning. Devices were inspected, non-disclosure agreements reviewed, and reminders of duty circulated like scripture. The palace was reclaiming its narrative by sheer force of authority. Yet, for all its discipline, there was unease in the air, an understanding that the institution's oldest weapon, silence, might not hold against the digital age. Across the Atlantic, the counterstrike was already forming. Meghan's team, furious and unafraid, began crafting their response. They weren't going to be painted as villains in their own story. Legal advisors and PR strategists in Los Angeles and New York coordinated through encrypted channels, preparing to release evidence that would turn the palace's version upside down. They called it context, but behind that word was a threat proof of the message's authenticity, proof of manipulation from both sides, proof that the palace's moral authority was not just cracked, but crumbling. In London, royal aides sensed the shift. What began as a damage control operation was evolving into a transatlantic war of narratives. One the monarchy could not fully contain. And as journalists prepared for the next wave of revelations, one line of communication from Meghan's camp sent shivers through the palace's defense. "You can silence people, but you can't silence truth." As one side tightened its grip, the other prepared to unleash something the palace feared most: evidence of what those texts were truly about. From Los Angeles to London, the air crackled with defiance. Meghan's camp was done playing defense. What had begun as a royal scandal had now evolved into open warfare. This wasn't about the leak anymore, it was about who would define the truth. Within hours of the palace's counteroffensive, Meghan's lawyers and her formidable PR team released what they called context files, a calculated response designed to dismantle the monarchy's narrative piece by piece. These files contained full transcripts, voice memos, and previously unseen messages that painted a very different story from the one circulating in the British press. What had been portrayed as manipulation now looked like desperation. The cry of a woman cornered within the world's most unyielding institution. The documents hit the media like thunder. The excerpts revealed emotional distress, fear of isolation, and a sense of betrayal that felt almost unbearable. They showed a woman pleading for understanding, not control. In one exchange, Meghan allegedly wrote, "I'm trying to follow the rules, but they change every day." Another message, sent late at night, read simply, "I can't keep pretending this doesn't hurt." Those words changed everything. For the first time, public sympathy surged back in her favor. The narrative shifted from scandal to survival. Across social media, people began asking not what Meghan had done wrong, but what had been done to her. Hidden within the files were subtle but powerful clues, timestamps, that placed several messages during moments of major royal crisis. Some were sent hours after public humiliations, others during reported internal feuds. The implication was clear. The texts were not manipulative ploys. They were desperate attempts to be heard. Analysts dissected every detail, noting that the tone of her messages mirrored the chaos happening inside the palace at those same times. It became harder for the monarchy to frame her as the aggressor when the evidence painted her as the one under siege. Then came the media divide, a transatlantic split that fractured the narrative along national lines. In Britain, headlines spoke of damage control and royal dignity. But in America, the story burned brighter. Talk shows, late-night hosts, and op-ed writers reframed the entire saga as a moral clash between the institution and the one individual. Meghan became the symbol of modern defiance against outdated power. She spoke up, and they silenced her. One major anchor declared, "It wasn't just a cultural divide, it was a philosophical one." In Britain, monarchy meant order. In America, it now meant oppression. Behind the media spectacle, Meghan remained silent publicly, at least. But inside her private circle, one act of quiet rebellion was already in motion. She had begun drafting a letter, addressed not to the world, not even to the press, but to one royal. The identity of the recipient remains a mystery. Some say it was to Charles, others whisper it was William, while a few claim it was written for the Queen herself. But this letter was not an apology. It was a warning, a final message from someone who had seen the machine up close and decided to step outside it forever. And it's that letter whispered about, never confirmed, hidden, like an ember waiting to ignite, that becomes the next explosive chapter. Because even the palace, with all its history, power, and control, could not contain what came next. It was meant to be private, one final plea, handwritten in quiet defiance, meant for the one person whose word could still calm the storm. The letter was never part of the media plan or the legal strategy. It was human, emotional, direct. A message from Meghan to the monarch, stripped of protocol and public defense. But the Queen never saw it. Somewhere between California and Windsor, that letter vanished, not lost, but buried. Its disappearance was no accident. And when fragments of it later surfaced online, the narrative surrounding the royal rift changed forever. According to insiders, the letter's contents were part confession, part warning. It was said to contain deeply personal grievances, the kind that never make it into press statements. Lines about feeling unheard, unprotected, and betrayed not by the monarchy itself, but by those who claimed to serve it. The tone, they said, was respectful yet resolute, the tone of someone who had accepted the war but still hoped to reach the heart of the empire before the final blow. But it was the final paragraph that reportedly sent chills through those who read it. It spoke of an upcoming exposure, a reckoning that would strip the illusion of harmony to reveal what loyalty has cost. The letter was addressed to the Queen but never delivered through official channels. Meghan's team avoided the traditional couriers, perhaps fearing interception, yet somehow it vanished all the same. Speculation erupted almost instantly. Some claimed palace security intercepted it before it reached the Queen's private desk. Others whispered that it was quietly redirected to senior advisors tasked with reviewing sensitive communications. Within weeks, snippets appeared in a U.S. outlet, published without context, but heavy with meaning. One fragment read, "They will rewrite the truth before you read it." That single sentence hit the monarchy like a thunderclap. It implied knowledge, forewarning of the palace's ability to shape perception before facts could take root. From that moment, the world split into two camps. To some, Meghan became the silenced voice, the outsider who had tried one last time to make peace and had been crushed by the institution's machinery. To others, it looked like a calculated move, a letter never meant to reach the Queen, but to exist as a future weapon in the court of public opinion. The ambiguity fed the chaos. Every word of that letter, or what people believed it contained, became fuel for a global debate about truth and control. The monarchy's silence only deepened the intrigue. Inside the palace, panic quietly spread, internal communications intensified, and what had begun as rumor soon demanded official attention. Sources claim King Charles himself ordered a full audit of correspondence, determined to trace every line of contact between Windsor and California. Staff were questioned, archives combed, and protocols reinforced. It wasn't about the letter anymore, it was about what its existence symbolized. A breach of control, a message that had escaped the boundaries of monarchy and landed in the hands of the world. Yet, for all their searching, the palace never confirmed its authenticity, and perhaps that was the point. The mystery itself was power, a letter both real and imagined, a story both whispered and denied. It lingered like a ghost, reshaping how people saw the monarchy's restraint and its fear. And as the institution scrambled to protect its secrets, something far greater had already begun to stir, something unstoppable, moving beyond protocol, beyond control. Because even as they searched for missing letters and deleted texts, a final revelation was already in motion, one that no palace crisis plan could prepare for. Just when the storm seemed to quiet, when the palace had regained its careful balance and the headlines began to fade, the world was hit by one final, devastating shock. A digital archive appeared online, uploaded to a secure international server. No announcement, no preamble, no warning. Its title was simple and chilling: The Truth in Full. What it contained would change the monarchy forever. This wasn't another leak. It wasn't speculation. It was a confession, one that no crisis manager, no royal aide, and no press statement could rewrite. The archive was vast, containing hundreds of unedited messages, voice recordings, and private notes stretching back years. Every word, every timestamp, every digital signature was intact. Cybersecurity experts quickly confirmed the files were genuine, their metadata untouched. There was no trace of fabrication or manipulation. Whoever released it had access at the highest level, and they wanted the world to see everything raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. Within hours, journalists from London to Los Angeles were combing through the material, and what they found left even the most hardened royal correspondents stunned. Among the most shocking revelations were the conversations between Meghan and senior palace aides. Some exchanges echoed the previously leaked texts, but now the context was complete. The tone shifted from confrontation to despair, from coldness to a kind of reluctant trust. There were notes of gratitude, exhaustion, and moments where she admitted, "I wanted to believe they cared." Yet buried within the messages was a recurring name, or rather, a set of initials: R.C. No full name, no title, just those two letters. Speculation spread like wildfire. Some claimed it stood for a senior royal. Others whispered it referred to someone in the palace's communications chain. The messages between Meghan and R.C. were strangely coded, filled with references to meetings, drafts, and containment strategies. No one outside the inner circle knew what they truly meant. As journalists released excerpts, the Commonwealth fractured under the weight of the revelations. Public opinion split violently. Some saw the archive as proof of institutional cruelty, undeniable evidence that the monarchy had silenced and isolated a woman trying to find her voice. Others called it treachery, accusing Meghan's camp of orchestrating a final act of destruction against an already fragile crown. Streets, tabloids, and online forums erupted with fury. Hashtags demanded accountability, while royal loyalists rallied to defend the family's dignity. It was not just a scandal anymore, it was a global referendum on the monarchy's relevance in the modern world. Inside Buckingham Palace, the reaction was immediate and frantic. Statements were drafted, retracted, and rewritten within hours. Finally, the palace broke centuries of precedent with an extraordinary declaration. An internal review of communications would be launched to ensure the continued integrity of royal operations. To outsiders, it read like diplomacy. To insiders, it reeked of panic. For the first time, the monarchy acknowledged a loss of control, not over their image, but over their truth. The illusion of invincibility had shattered. In the days that followed, experts and historians called it the beginning of the end of royal secrecy. They warned that once transparency seeps into the cracks of tradition, there is no way to seal it back. The monarchy's silence, once a source of strength, now sounded like guilt. And while the palace quietly worked to restore order, the damage had already been done. The public had seen too much. Yet, as the dust began to settle, a single haunting question remained. If these were the messages they hid, if this archive represented only a fraction of what lay behind those guarded walls, then what else was still buried, waiting to surface? What other truths, still hidden in the shadows, could one day rewrite history once again?